Chapter 4. Ghostmine. Steal, fight, forage, maintain. Without infrastructure, that's all we have now. Just keep going. But it's not enough. Circa 5 days, 21 hours, since the assassination of rebel leadership. Estingai hopped out of the speeder, eager to get this over with. It was later than she would have liked. They'd had to wait to make sure the auroras were far enough away that they wouldn't be directly overhead on the way here or the way back. Just in case. The initial burst of energy the auroras had given Estingai was waning, though the aurora light would last for a full week with mild use. And everyone kept looking at her with pity. Except Kozasana. Estingai's friend kept looking at her like she would snap at any moment, which made Estingai want to do exactly that. She was grateful for her mask as she waited for the others to get out of the speeder and off their bikes, then hide the vehicles under some carefully crafted rock formations made specifically for that purpose. Nightstone's base, Ghostmine, was closer to the coast and Imaya territory, necessitating more extreme precautions than any of the other factions. Estingai checked over the geoauroral settings while the others arranged some leaves and fallen branches to cover the vehicles. There was more coverage from trees and plants here than at Wolfden, Estingai's own base, but they still needed their light covers until they went inside. The mask made it a bit harder for Estingai to get a good look at some of the more complex wireframes encasing the biogems that powered the vehicles, but she was used to it. The speeder had seemed a bit off-balance to her on the ride over, and sure enough, one of the wires that pressed against the biogems to control their output was a little loose. A few careful twists with the pliers she carried at her waist corrected that. Once the speeders, stolen Amaya prototypes that used emerald georols to hover over the volcanic rock littering the continent, leaving no tracks in their wake, were safely out of sight, Estingai turned from the others and hopped down into the large hole that concealed an entrance to the old mine. Kozasana followed first. Eri, their envoy, who would take care of things once Estingai made sure everything was safe, came last. Looking around, Estingai frowned. With all the color here, and the humid and salty air, she felt like there should be some Oru around. There was no sign of the little spirits, however. Not for a few years now. Estingai glanced up at the sky, trying to find Atyaku, but the stone walls restricted her view, and they were too far from the twilight band to see Ephramani's moon anyway. The spirit's disappearance, at least, had solved an ages-old debate of whether it was the Oru's appearances that gave everyone such a precise sense of time, or if that was something they possessed independent of the spirits. It was 3 hours, 10 minutes, and 48 seconds past midday, and Estingai needed no Oru to tell her that. Looking at the dark, foreboding entrance to the mine, Estingai's stomach grew tight. She had to force back a sudden assault of claustrophobia. She drew in a deep breath of the salty, humid air, but that just conjured images of this hole filling up with water. The mine completely flooded. Those inside drowned. Her heart pounded, and Estingai realized she was drawing in deep, shuddering breaths. She had to flex her fingers and roll her shoulders to reassure herself as she remembered being trapped underground, clawing her way out of the rubble, then wandering for hours in pitch-black winding tunnels. Her forehead grew hot, hands clammy. Gritting her teeth, Estingai shook her head and brightened her yellow and black notes, giving herself a bit of good luck and the ability to sense nearby uses of auroramancy. There was some deeper in the mine, too faint for her to make out any individual signatures. With a deep breath, Estingai looked to the others, bracing herself for the expectation or pity she was sure she would find there. She instead found everyone focused on the mine entrance. "This doesn't seem right," Eri said. "It's too empty," Silumoy, their scout, agreed. He was a tall Natari auroramancer with a gray gem crest, one of their fastest. "I know we're close to Amaya territory, but Farakas, another Natari Auroromancer with an amethyst gem crest, nodded in agreement. A part of Estingai wanted to agree with them. This place was supposed to look abandoned, untouched. But it should have had some signs of occupancy. Even when Estingai brightened her clear nodes, staring into the shadows of the mine's cavernous entrance, she saw no weapons on the wall, no litter, no footprints or old, decomposing wood. They take their security even more seriously than we do, she said, as much to herself as to her companions. Swallowing, she glanced back at them. You all went out where you weren't supposed to when you were kids and explored old, creepy-looking places, didn't you? The Amaya still have children with them out here. Her Natari team members frowned, but nodded. Eri and Silas, a Samyadi medic with no antlers who kept his black nodes bright to conceal their presence, wobbled their heads sullenly. Looking to the entrance again, Estingai hesitated, thinking back to a week ago when she, Svemaku, and Raima had descended underground through a cave not unlike this one. At the end of that tunnel, her husband had died at the Death Knight's hand. The Death Knight. How did it have her face? How? Estingai's heart pounded, throat tight. Kojiteri was dead. The Death Knight's face had been a pale, gray-white with strange gold markings. No makeup, hair cut short. But that was her. Her same confident, almost arrogant way of carrying herself. Those eyes, the way she fought. Tzara. Estingai put a hand to her chest. She could barely breathe. Estingai. Estingai swallowed hard at Kozasana's voice and set her jaw as she looked to her friend. Worry furrowed the woman's red brow. Estingai gritted her teeth, nearly growling as she forced herself to relax. Stop. You can't lead the Remnant or Frozen Phantom, but you can lead this team into a cave. This is what you're good at. You still want to turn back? She asked her team. Her heart pounded still, but she was no longer seconds from a full-blown panic attack. Kozasana shook her head. The others didn't respond. I need to do something. I can't keep standing here. Frowning, Estingai walked toward the cave mouth and knelt down. She was about to brighten her orange notes, but paused, tense. For a moment, all she could see was the Death Knight, killing the faction heads and their guards with casual indifference. Would she see the same thing here if she looked into the past? Estingai took a deep, shuddering breath, gritting her teeth and squeezing her eyes shut as she forced the image from her mind. She brightened her orange notes. It took a few minutes, as she didn't have a direct point in time to consider. But eventually, Estingai saw the shimmering shades of 2 Nightstone guards, visible to her alone, standing just inside the mine entrance. Keeping her orange notes bright, Estingai watched as another joined them from her direction, and all 3 started sweeping the area just inside and outside the entrance. They packed up a few stools and water bottles, then covered their faces before disappearing deeper into the mine and out of Estingai's sight. Estingai watched for a while longer to see if anyone followed. No one did. When she'd used about 1/6 of the aurora light in that pair of biogems, Estingai dimmed them and turned toward the others. She wavered for a moment. Coming out of an orange vision was always disorienting. Then nodded toward the entrance. They're here. I saw the guards clean up and disappear deeper inside. They had orders to retreat to the main hall and put the base on lockdown. What if they attack us? Eri said. This is their territory, and if they've locked this place down, they're likely on edge as we were, and they don't know what happened at the meeting with the faction heads. Estingai frowned. Those were valid concerns, and she didn't have a good answer. But she needed to keep moving. She looked at Kozasana, who raised an eyebrow. Does she agree with Eri, or did I give something away? Estingai thought for a moment, pushing back a wave of paranoia as her stomach clenched. She took a deep breath. Perché? Estingai forced herself toward the base, ignoring Kozasana's soft chuckle at her swearing. Let's just get this over with. If the rest of you want to leave, make sure to leave a bike behind for me. It took 7 seconds before their footsteps melded with Estingai's. The soft padding echoed off the stone walls like an old drum group. Estingai thought of acknowledging them. Instead, she continued on, toward the auroromantic signatures on the edge of her senses, and let the mind's darkness wash over her. The tunnels of Nightstone Base grew more foreboding the deeper Estingai and her companions ventured. No cloth hung on the walls to dampen the echoes of their footsteps, and no light illuminated their path save the small electric torches they carried. With the way so lonely and empty, Estingai had to grit her teeth to keep her paranoia at bay. As it was, she nearly flinched every time someone moved the light of their torch, making the shadows jump. It had alerted them to a few tripwires the Nightstone guards had set, however, which they carefully disarmed. So, Kozasana whispered, stepping up beside Estingai. You going to apologize for being so harsh on them earlier? Estingai winced. The smooth stone of the tunnels carried and amplified even the faintest sounds. She wanted to snap at Kozasana. Instead, she sighed. I let my exhaustion get the best of me, she admitted. Kozasana nodded, and they walked in silence for a while before Estingai's friend spoke again. How do you think we should handle the meeting? Estingai looked at her friend, then shrugged. We should just leave that to Eri. He's more skilled in that sort of thing. Kozasana shrugged. True. But then why did you come along? Estingai had no answer for her. That she needed to get out of the base, away from Uchantu and Karuxi, away from her room that was so unbearably empty, didn't seem like a response Kozasana would accept. You know what you mean to everyone, Estingai. Even those in the other factions. Estingai winced, but Kozasana kept going. You have to accept that at some point. Your name, what you are, carries weight whether you like it or not. Estingai had nothing to say to that. She didn't trust herself to speak. Partially because she was afraid she would bite Kozasana's head off. And because she was afraid it would be her voice that caused some sort of unseen trap to be sprung. She kept her fists clenched. Every darkened doorway or twisting corridor made her throat tighten and her heart pound a bit harder. Drawing in a deep breath, Estingai tried again to think of something that had been bothering her the past week. How did the Amaya know? No one else seemed interested in that. Not Maryatla, not Karuxi, not Kozasana. The only explanation was that someone had betrayed them. But was it one of the faction heads, or someone they were close to? Someone that manipulated them into needing to share something like that, the way she and Sfamaku had told Karuxi and Uchantu. Or what if it was one of the aides, like Maryatla? One of those who stood to take over the faction in their leader's stead. Estingai didn't even know where to begin searching for clues like that. Intelligence work had always been Phantom's job before he'd abandoned them with Navisi and Queshruma and the rest of the Knights. Her faction shared his name for its expertise in intelligence and infiltration, but Phantom had always been on an entirely different level than anyone else. She could acknowledge that much, no matter how she despised the man. Estingai? Estingai blinked and reflexively shushed Kozasana, who threw her a flat look. Right. She asked me something. With a sigh, Estingai took off her helmet. She held it rather than hanging it at her waist. It gave her hands something to do. What was that? Kozasana shot her a wry grin and moved closer. I asked about the meeting. I know you told us on the way what it was and why there was so much secrecy around it, but is there anything else I should know? That Frozen Phantom should know? Estingai frowned and raised the brightness of her black notes. The auroromantic signatures had grown stronger, and she could sense that she and her companions were headed toward them, down and to the left. But there was only so far her black notes could guide her in tunnels that twisted and turned and wound around each other. They hushed those of their team who made noises as they walked, and Estingai sighed when she saw the other four huddled together as they trailed her and Kozasana. She quietly ordered them to fan out and check corners and peek down corridors they passed. They didn't want to trip any of Nightstone's defenses. After a while, Estingai raised a hand to halt the others and brightened her orange nodes once more. She had to force the Death Knight's visage from her mind again, and her pulse spiked. But she did it. Again, she saw people headed deeper into the tunnels, taking down cloth-dampening patches and sconces and light posts, cleaning up litter as they went. There were more people this time. Their steps were hurried, but not frantic. This was an orderly drill, just like the ones we run. When Estingai dimmed her orange nodes back to their resting brightness, she found she had only about half the aurora light left in that pair. She frowned. Orange nodes rarely proved useful in combat situations, but that was still aurora light she could direct to her other abilities if needed. Only 3 or 4 more uses before I deplete them entirely. Estingai raised a hand again, and her group continued on in silence, save for their echoing footsteps. Every deviation in sound, every breath that was loud enough to echo on the stone walls, set Estingai on edge. She tried to distract herself from that by looking at the tunnel walls and thinking about how they were carved and what they would have been long ago. Had these merely been the result of ancient mining? Or had someone lived in them to beat the heat, then discovered the valuable minerals? That was Samyati thinking. Most Natari loved being out in the sun. It seemed to energize them, like a dip in a cold river energized Estingai. A tap on Estingai's arm nearly made her jump. Her heart pounded as it was, and she tried not to glare at Kozasana. Sorry. Apparently I didn't try hard enough. What is it? What are we going to do when we get there? Before the meeting? They are going to be armed and expecting intruders, not an envoy or whatever Ares' official title is. Estingai frowned, but she saw Kozasana's point. In a Nightstone Guard situation, she would attack first and ask questions later. I'll go in first. I'll just need the rest of you to support me. And if they attack you? Estingai rolled her eyes. I'll give them a signal only the leadership knows. Maryatla and Aiden know it, so do Kruxi and Duchantu, so someone left behind should recognize it and tell their guards not to kill me. And once that happens? Estingai frowned, then stopped and looked over her shoulder toward Aerie. He met her gaze and cocked his head, the light of his torch just below her chin. Milora said something about needing more emerald biogems during the meeting. We should lead with that, since we can offer intelligence about Amaya shipments carrying those. Aerie nodded. Yes, Estingai. Anything else? Estingai thought for a moment. If we can get Iron Peak and Last Shadow to ally with us, we should be able to relocate most of the people in this base so they don't have to take as many security precautions or have so many so close to Amaya territory. Aerie wobbled his head this time. Thank you, Estingai. I can definitely work with that. Estingai found herself smiling as she looked forward and started walking again. That felt good. It made her feel useful. How much farther? Estingai shrugged at Kozasana's question. I think we're about halfway. Hard to tell since it's not a straight line, though. Are we going to talk about your fight with Koruxi and Mariatla? Estingai frowned and quickened her pace. I'd rather not. Even though it's something you need to talk to someone about? Yes, Estingai growled. The sound that made when it echoed through the tunnel sent shivers down her spine. Kozasana was silent for a while as they continued forward, but it didn't help Estingai relax. What are you going to do after this? Her friend asked. Estingai didn't say anything. Kozasana moved closer, lowering her voice to the point that Estingai nearly had to brighten her clear nodes to hear. I know you've been pulling extra shifts, not sleeping. You can't just keep going like this until you fall over. I know you've had your grey nodes brightened at a low level the past few days just to keep going. Estingai stopped, realizing Kozasana was right. She had her grey nodes on a low brightness, just above their resting levels. Hers didn't grant the strength Karuxi's did, but they helped her move quicker and aided her balance. With them this low, it should have been barely noticeable. Unless I have someone worried enough to pay that close attention to me. She knew better than to push herself this way, but found it hard to care lately. Estingai sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. She brightened her orange nodes for just a moment to cover her pause, and saw more people this time, moving slower, some more orderly than others. That made sense. They passed a number of tunnels that branched off from this one. We keep going this way, Estingai said, starting forward again. She didn't dim her grey notes. You can't just keep going like this or fade into the background, Estingai, Kozasana prodded. Like it or not, you're the best chance we have at getting out of this. Estingai took a deep breath. Clearly, her friend would not be satisfied until Estingai gave her an actual answer. She thought for a moment, feeling a bit less claustrophobic as the tunnel opened up and signs of habitation started appearing. Doorframes and hung cloth over tunnel openings and walls, shelves and benches carved into the walls are raised out of the ground. I know, Estingai said. I just need time. I know I shouldn't have left things that way with Kruxi and Duchantu and Mariatla. She cut off as Kozasana put a hand on her shoulder. I know. You're not the only one that lost people. Estingai met her gaze, even in the dim lighting provided by their torches. She could see the pain in her friend's golden brown eyes. I didn't know Raima as well as you did, Kozasana said. But she was a good leader, fair. Someone who gave us direction and held us together when we needed her. As for Svemaku, she grinned, and Estingai's chest grew tight. He was my friend too. I know it's not the same. I don't think I've known many couples, even my own parents, who had what you two did. It still hurts, though, losing him. He would always come by after we went on an assignment to play a game or cook and somehow make something tasty out of the rations. Even if he hadn't gone with us, he always came to talk. We knew he was checking up on us, but he never made it seem like that. He just managed to make us feel better. Kozasana sighed. It never gets easier, seeing your friends die. The pain never fades into the background like you wish it would. Estingai swallowed a lump in her throat. She was about to agree with her friend when she realized something. Meeting Kozasana's gaze once more, Estingai saw that her friend really was hurting as bad as she was. More than that, she's hurt that I wouldn't talk to her about it. Just like it would hurt Svemaku when I kept things to myself instead of letting him share my burden. A flash of anger twisted Estingai's stomach. A part of her hated that about other people. Hated that they wouldn't just let her keep things inside where they belonged. She reminded herself, though, that she'd never felt more at peace in her life than when she'd had someone to share things with. Vitus Famaku. He gets me to open up, then leaves me without anyone to do that with. Estingai started to say something to Kozasana, to let her know it wasn't an issue between them, that it was just how she was, when she noticed the woman had stopped. Estingai tensed, shining her torch before her, then relaxed as metal glinted under the electric light. A massive metal door with a thick frame outlined the entrance to a cavern before them. It was shut, but Estingai recognized it by its size and reinforced design. These doors were one of the few things the factions had shared with one another, a safeguard to buy time if their bases were ever discovered. Estingai looked at Kozasana, who nodded, then back to the door, taking a deep breath. She concentrated on the signature her auroromantic sense picked up. It was strong behind the door. They were here. Estingai studied the door for a moment, then frowned as her auroromantic senses registered a change. The number of signatures had decreased. Only one was active now. Black notes like her own, sensing for anyone nearby using auroromancy. Estingai's use would be concealed by Sila's onyx gem crest. Samyati shrouded, Natari revealed. Estingai almost told Sila to dim his gem crest, so that those on the other side of the door wouldn't be a surprise when she knocked. She hesitated, though, and brightened her orange notes again, just long enough for one last peek into the past. Her hands barely shook at all this time. When she saw Nightstone members filing orderly into the room, hurried but not panicked, Estingai dimmed her orange nodes again. Only a small amount of aurora light remained in her pair of orange nodes, maybe a 1/12 of their full capacity. She didn't transfer it to her other biogems. Depleting her orange nodes always left her with a foggy recollection of anything that happened until she restored light to them. Taking a deep breath, Estingai turned back to Sila and signaled for him to dim his black notes. She kept her own bright. Stepping up to the middle door, she knocked, wincing at the metallic echo that bounced off the stone walls. Then shouted the code. "Phantom's balls!" Kozasana snorted, the sound barely audible over the echo of Estingai's voice. Estingai turned to her friend and found Kozasana with a wide smirk splitting her full Natari lips. "You're joking." Estingai shrugged, managing a bit of a smile. "I helped Rima come up with it. I have yet to hear of a situation where he wasn't an asshole." The others laughed, and some of Estingai's tension left her. If they can still find laughter in a place like this, maybe... Estingai shook her head and straightened her shoulders. It wasn't time for that right now. No one had answered, and the auroromantic signal on the other end hadn't changed. Estingai waited a moment, frowning, then knocked again and shouted the code louder. Once the echoes died and there was still no answer, Estingai brightened her clear nodes and pressed her ear up against the cold, smooth metal. Nothing. That seemed wrong to her, but these doors were thick, and she realized she didn't have a frame of reference for how well she should be able to hear through a few inches of Titan steel and aluminum. "I don't like this," Sila murmured. Estingai didn't either. It was up to her to make sure the others didn't panic, however. "I think I need to rip it off." Kozasana looked at her wide-eyed. "How? We don't have any Greyarms." Estingai shrugged. "The stone around the door. I can move that." "Shouldn't it be built to withstand something like that?" Farkas asked. "There's only so many precautions we can take. Plus, That works as a failsafe if there was a malfunction with the door or the generators. It's probably what happened here. She looked around at her team. Just cover me. I can't imagine they'll be expecting someone to tear open their door. As her companions formed up to either side of her, Estingai fell into a horse stance. She extended one arm toward the door, and the other toward part of the stone wall opposite the massive slab of malfunctioning metal. For a moment, she thought of using her violet nodes and aqua nodes to superheat the stone and turn it into lava around the doorframe. That would be easier to manipulate, but that amount of heat would require more aurora light than she was comfortable using down here. Splitting the stone with her green nodes and moving the frame back would still take a lot, but Estingai weighed the options in her mind, trying to make a rough calculation of the costs, then brightened her green nodes. She would try to do this in one shot. Flexing her hands, Estingai looked to her companions. It might be a good idea if you all give me some space. Cover from the flanks of the door. They nodded, then gave her room. Estingai shot them a half smile in thanks, then put her helmet back on and used her green nodes to reach out to the stone on either side of her. She anchored herself on the wall and felt at the stone around the metal door. Once she had the image in her head, she brightened one of her opal nodes and flared her green nodes. A loud, bone-chilling crack split the air, echoing through the tunnels, accompanied by a rumble that made Estingai's stomach clench. Stone and metal scraping stone, and a loud grunt from Estingai followed that as the door and its stone frame lurched toward her, covering about half the distance. Estingai dimmed her gem crest back to its resting level and took a few deep breaths. Her heart pounded and her body felt like she'd just run through one of her old conditioning workouts. She removed her helmet, wiped the sweat from her brow, then put it back on and trotted forward. No one's come out to kill us, at least. That must be... Estingai's veins turned to ice as she stepped up to the opening she'd created. The room beyond was dark, but she brightened her clear nodes on reflex. Between that and the ambient light from her companions' torches, she could see the charnel house that had once been the core of Ghostmine. The dead lay everywhere. Cut, burnt, torn apart. Estingai swallowed even as she primed her gem crest, falling into a fighting stance. One hand gripped her sidearm. The other she stretched out to the side, fingers splayed, ready to wield the hard light construct. She tasted bile. Her palms began to sweat. Memories of how the light had winked out of the underground chamber a week ago at the Death Knight's arrival flashed before her eyes. Blood's metallic tang mixed with the pungent stenches of burnt hair and flesh as they filled the air, but the bodies themselves hadn't begun to smell yet. As her companions shone their lights through the room, one of them retched. Near the back of the chamber, a Lightforged in sleek, shining armor, somehow untouched by blood, held a struggling Natari woman in the air by her throat. "You know where they are," it said. "My contact only provided coordinates for the space, but rats always know where the nearby dens are." Its voice racked Estingai with shivers. It was too normal. Her stomach twisted. There were a few other huddled, whimpering forms, bruised and clutching at stumps or limbs bent the wrong way. Estingai had taken down a few of these monsters with Sfamaku and the other knights, but as this one turned to face them, cocking its head, she found herself paralyzed. "I thought I'd caught all of you." The demon tossed the Natari woman to the side. Her body hit the wall with a crunch and crumbled to the stone floor. That and the wicked silvery antlers that curved out from the top of its masked helmet told Estingai that this monster was a Samyati traitor who had chosen to fight for Anukudas. They'd given up something of themselves for the power of an Atari Aurora-born, and the gift of being extremely hard to kill. The tall, masked monster started toward them, slow but purposeful. The shining mask that hid its face mocked ancient Samyati traditions. Everything about it seemed to drain what little light illuminated the room. "Run!" Estingai hissed, throat dry. "Sinumbe, go!" Kozasana said, shouldering her rifle as she flanked Estingai. "One the base, we'll hold it off." One of the torchlights flashed. Moments later, the scout's supernaturally fast footsteps echoed down the tunnel. "The rest of you too," Estingai ordered. Kozasana shook her head. "We're staying." "We're with you too, Estingai," Eri added. The Lightforged stopped, cocking its head again. The movement made it seem almost like some grotesque puppet operated by the God King. "Estingai? One of the Night Mother's Knights Reborn?" Hearing the thing say her name made Estingai's stomach curdle. The monster's laugh nearly made her vomit. "That makes this so much more interesting." Estingai brightened her gem crest as the Lightforged turned its masked gaze on her. Then she stopped. She could do nothing as the monster sped across the room with Greynode-enhanced speed. "Estingai! No, Visions of the Death Knight returned to her. It looked so much like this Lightforged. But this one wielded no massive blade. "Perke, cover her!" Then Eri was in front of her. The envoy, not an Auroramancer, leveled his rifle and fired at the approaching Lightforged. Even with the dead bodies to dampen the sound, each report became an explosion in the stone-walled room. The bullets did nothing. Eri hadn't aimed for the biogems at the edges and joints, and the aluminum-plated sections of armor could somehow block rifles and small arms fire with barely a scratch. "Get out of here!" Eri shouted. Estingai grunted as someone yanked her back out the opening between the stone chunk she'd ripped from the wall and the smooth stone archway around it. A quick glance behind her told her it was Kozasana. The Lightforged slammed Ari against the massive doors, shaking the freestanding miniature wall. The snapping of his bones as his body broke reverberated through the tunnels. It nearly made Estingai retch, but snapped her out of whatever had held her back. Eri's death was on her now. Just one more to add to the list. As the Lightforged followed her and Kozasana around the slab of metal and stone, Estingai brightened her gray notes for speed and her red notes for hard light. She formed a shield over one hand and drew her sidearm with the other, firing at the biogems on the Lightforged armor as it approached. She didn't hit a single one. Estingai's gray notes let her sidestep a blow that would have shattered her shoulder, then bash the monster in the head with her hard light. Even as the Lightforged recoiled, it spun. Hard light flashed, and Estingai roared at a sudden line of heat down her thigh. She looked down to find her pant leg torn. Blood spilled from a cut nearly the length of her forearm. She looked up. The Lightforged loomed over her. Then fire blazed before it. Estingai scrambled back as the monster turned its attention toward Farkas. Hands pulled her up, and she groaned at the white-hot pain in her leg and the weakness that followed. "Run!" Farkas shouted. "She needs to make it out!" Estingai realized that he was shouting at Kozasana, not her, and that her friend was the one pulling her away from the Lightforged. "No touches," Kozasana hissed. "We need to get out of here without it following. Run! We can slow down once we've made it somewhere dark and far enough to hide." Estingai barely heard her words, eyes fixed on Farkas as he tried in vain to hold off the Lightforged. "Estingai, now!" Swallowing bile, Estingai turned and sprinted with her friend away from the Lightforged, trying to ignore the searing pain in her leg. She hoped it would be too dark for bloody footprints to give them away. Estingai tried to quiet her breathing as she limped along through the darkness with Kozasana. The Natari woman supported most of Estingai's weight, but she didn't complain and kept up a quick pace despite the burden. They hadn't been able to stop for a bandage, and though Estingai didn't feel woozy like she might from blood loss, The exhaustion was getting to her. She'd had to dim her gem crest to keep the Lightforged from tracking them, which meant no more quickness in her step, no more little boost of energy or balance to keep her from falling on her face when she stubbed her toe on something unseen as they made their way through the blackness. "Shouldn't we be close by now?" Estingai said into her shoulder, trying to muffle the sound. "It didn't take that long to get down here." Kozasana was silent for a moment. "We went the wrong way." Estingai's stomach tightened. No. Her palms began to sweat. The walls pressed in on her, choking her. Her heart began to pound in time with the throbbing in her thigh. No. Somehow, Estingai shook off the panic attack. She still felt sick, and sweat dampened her underclothes, but she could think again at least. A part of her wanted to snap at Kozasana for pulling her the wrong way. She knew it wasn't her friend's fault, however. There must be another exit, or we can just hide until it leaves or run out of aurora light. That was the one weakness those monsters had. While most people only needed aurora light to keep them from the depression of lightlessness, Lightforged needed it to survive. "Can you see anything?" Kozasana asked. Estingai took a deep, quiet breath and tried to focus through the throbbing. "Barely." "You lead then." As they moved deeper into the caves, Estingai noticed more signs of habitation here. Some she and Kozasana nearly tripped over. Most dampened the sound, making it less risky to talk. It still wouldn't be entirely safe, however. "Can you do anything to sense where it is or if it is following us?" Estingai winced at the fear in her friend's voice. They were soldiers, but they were being chased by a demon. No, it would sense me. She wished she knew more about the Lightforged, but they'd never been able to successfully capture and detain one for interrogation or study. What would it matter? You can't fight like this. You're wounded, losing blood, and it doesn't even have to meet you in a fight. "Any ideas on how to get out of this?" There was a bit of mirth to Kozasana's tone, but it fell flat with Estingai. She shook her head. "I don't think we will." Kozasana stopped, nearly sending both of them tumbling forward with Estingai's momentum. "You can't just give up like that. You're the last knight died back in that cave with Sfamaku," Estingai hissed. "He was what kept me going after I lost everything again and again. I'm just the broken wretch that managed to crawl out from the rubble." Kozasana was silent for a moment. When Estingai glanced at her, she saw the faint outline of the woman's hand feeling around in the darkness. A moment later, Kozasana moved them forward, then helped Estingai down behind some crates. "The way I remember it," Kozasana whispered, "you stole a weapon from Sulehep and Koyatere herself, and threatened Sfamaku with it when he followed you." Estingai was silent as Kozasana rifled through one of her pouches. She winced when Kozasana pressed a piece of cloth down over her laceration and started wrapping something around her thigh. Estingai pressed down on the cloth and let Kozasana work in silence for a while. "I'm not sure if I can be that person again." Kozasana paused for just a moment in bandaging Estingai. "You must have something in you that wants to fight." Estingai gritted her teeth. She wished she knew where Kozasana and Garuxi and Sfamaku got the stupid hope they always managed to cling to. She'd yet to see it turn out the way they thought, but it would be nice to have the delusion for a bit at least. "I want to," she told Kozasana. "But it's just so hard." Estingai's friend said nothing as she finished wrapping up Estingai's thigh. It didn't do much for the pain, but knowing there was some pressure on the wound was a small comfort. She would need stitches and a few healing gear rolls if she ever... Something echoed through the tunnel behind Estingai. She scrunched herself down even further behind the crates, slipping a hand over Kozasana's mouth. All Estingai's effort went into slowing and quieting her breath. But she worried the demon could hear even that, or smell her blood or sweat with its enhanced senses. As the echoing, the steps, continued forward, Estingai's breath grew harder to control. Her heart beat faster and faster, harder, until she was certain the Lightforged could hear that too. Her palms began to sweat again, throat tightening. The crate behind her and the tunnel wall to her right pressed against her, trapping her here in this dark pit. Swallowing hard, trying to force back her fear, Estingai looked to Kozasana. She could barely see in the pitch darkness of the tunnel, but her half-Samyati blood allowed her some night vision at least. Her friend looked terrified. She wasn't an Auroramancer, yet she held her rifle ready. Brave, even when facing a demon she couldn't hope to fight. "I know you're here, Knight." Estingai's entire body tensed. Not just at the Lightforged's address, but how close it sounded. "I have great plans for you," it continued. "Plans that will see you off this dying world." Estingai took Kozasana's wrist, trying to draw even a drop of strength from her friend. Maybe she can get out, even if I can't. The thing wants me. It won't care about her. Kozasana turned to her, somehow meeting her eyes in the darkness. "Your god has betrayed you," the Lightforged said, only a few paces away. "Why die fighting for her when you can join the redeemed and fight the true enemy? The two you left to distract me no longer have that chance." Estingai squeezed Kozasana's wrist, the other hand going to her torch. Her friend nodded, jaw set. The demon's steps grew closer. It had to be just on the other side of the crate. Estingai tapped 3 fingers on Kozasana's wrist, taking a deep breath. Then 2. Kozasana tensed. 1. Estingai leapt out from behind the crates, switching on her torch. She'd been right about the demon's position. For a moment, seeing it illuminated like that against the darkness, tall and imperious, made her resolve falter. Even as it turned its gaze on her, cocking its head, Kozasana sprang to her feet and opened fire. Her rifle was a combination prototype they'd stolen from the Amaya. Instead of firing bullets at the Lightforged, it used a magnetic coil to fire a superheated piece of metal at the monster. The blow dented its armor, knocking it back. It straightened, but by then, Estingai was in the air, violet nodes and red nodes bright. Her torch was on the floor now, but between its ambient light and the glowing geororals on the demon's armor, she could track her target just fine. Estingai came down with a needle-sharp dagger of hard light, something she doubted even this monster could manage, wreathed in white-hot flame. Her searing blade landed where the Lightforged shoulder met its neck, right between the plates of armor. For a moment, the demon staggered back, and a brief spark of hope flared to life within Estingai. That vanished as the Lightforged grabbed her by her waist and flung her back against the wall. Estingai hit with a crack, drawing in a ragged breath. She didn't think anything was broken, but her back would be one massive bruise if she made it out of here. "I guess we're doing this the hard way," the demon said, sounding almost annoyed as Estingai struggled to regain her feet. "I've completed my mission here, but I'm not leaving without my prize." The low hum of Kozasana's rifle charging for another shot reached Estingai's ears, and she grinned. Moving with enhanced speed, the Lightforged whirled toward Kozasana and ripped the rifle from her hands, then bashed her in the face with it. Or, it tried to. Kozasana's quick reflexes allowed her to duck, just in time. She rolled to the side, then drew her sidearm, firing at the Lightforged's neck. The Lightforged staggered back as a few of Kozasana's shots landed, but it took only a few seconds for Estingai's friend to empty her magazine. Even as Estingai flared her violet nodes, sending bolts of lightning toward the Lightforged, the demon conjured a hard light shield before it. Still, Kozasana pressed it, drawing the short sword from her side. Many saw it as an archaic weapon, but in close quarters fighting in tunnels like this, it often proved far more useful than a firearm. Not against the Lightforged, though. As Kozasana ducked under the hard light barrier, swinging at the demon, it sidestepped her blow and swept at Kozasana's legs. For a few seconds, Kozasana matched the demon blow for blow. Then it moved too quickly and caught her by the throat. Estingai's stomach knotted. It had been playing with them. Of course it was. Even if Kozasana had landed a killing blow like Estingai, the demon would have merely shrugged it off. The Lightforged studied Kozasana for a moment as it held Estingai's friend in the air. Then it turned its masked gaze on Estingai. A wet crunch echoed through the tunnel, and Estingai screamed.